The peacemakers at the Versailles settlement had a difficult job as there was high optimism from the public. The optimism was probably due to the presence of US President Woodrow Wilson as one of the peacemakers. Right from the beginning, Wilson had emphasized on the fact that US had joined the war with France, Britain and Russia as an associated power and not as an ally. According to him, Britain and France were fighting for selfish motives, whereas USA was fighting for world peace. Wilson was strongly against imperialism. In a speech to Congress on 8 January 1918, Wilson had stated USA war aims in his 14 points, which can be summarized as follows: no secret treaties, general disarmament, free trade between countries, self-determination in newly established countries, and setting up of a peacekeeping body in order to preserve peace. Wilson was an idealist whose aim was to build a better and more peaceful world. He wanted to punish Germany but did not want to impose very harsh terms on it. Wilson believed that if the harsh terms are imposed on Germany, it would retaliate once it recovered. He also feared that too economically devastated Germany would encourage a type of Russian revolution and it would be too dangerous for European countries being neighbors. He also believed that all countries that were carved out of the larger empires as a result of breakup should have the right of self-determination, rather than ruled by the empires. That would end the frustration that had contributed to the outbreak of World War I. Living far away in America, Wilson did not understand well how difficult self-determination was in much of the Eastern Europe. If Czechs and Germans and Slovaks lived together in an area, who had the right of self-determination? The British and French were imperialists. Their governments were very suspicious of talks of self-determination. Wilson, in addition, talked about open diplomacy, world disarmament, economic integration, and a League of Nations, which could stop secret alliances and force countries to work together to prevent tragedies such as World War I from happening again. However, Wilson's idealist views were not shared by Clemenceau and Lloyd George. Clemenceau had once commented that even God had only needed 10 commandments, why Wilson needed as many as 14. The 14 points had attacked many ideas that the French and British held dear. The European leaders were more concerned about selfish national interests than doing good. Clemenceau wanted a harsh settlement to ensure that Germany could not threaten France again. Clemenceau was nicknamed the Tiger due to his hardline approach towards Germany in Versailles settlement. Being Prime Minister of France, he was in a very critical situation. He was aware that most French wanted revenge for the devastation of the war. France had suffered greatly during the First World War. A quarter of all Frenchmen aged 18 to 27 had been killed. Another 4 million had been wounded. Much of the northeastern France had been devastated. The French government had borrowed huge sum of money to fight the war and was faced with enormous debt. Clemenceau wanted Germany to pay for all these losses. Germany had invaded France twice, one in 1870 during Franco-Prussian War and the other in 1914 during World War I. France was definitely apprehensive of the third invasion. It was the aim and priority of Clemenceau to make France secure in future. At the end of the peace conference, Clemenceau had said, "America is far away, protected by the ocean. Not even Napoleon could touch England. You are both sheltered, we are not." Germany was France's neighbor with no mountains or rivers to mark the borders between the two countries. From Clemenceau's point of view, Germany had to be weakened so that there would never be a third invasion of France. To achieve these aims, he had the following objectives in his mind, which was the voice of French public in general. Germany should be disarmed and pay higher reparation for all the damages done to France. Return of the provinces of Alsace and Lorraine, Saarland from Germany to be handed over to France, some German colonies in Africa to be handed over to France, Rhineland, the area around the river Rhine to be made independent and as a buffer state between France and Germany. Ideally, the French wanted to break up Germany into a number of smaller, weaker states. When this did not happen, Clemenceau called for Germany to lose Rhineland, Saarland, Upper Silesia, Danzig and East Prussia. These areas had much of coal and heavy industries. Clemenceau was also keen to retain wartime links with Britain and America and was ready to make concessions in order to achieve this aim. However, he disagreed very strongly with USA over the question of reparation amount. The position of USA was very different to France and Britain. For the two European countries, particularly France, the war had been an economic disaster, whereas USA had not suffered economically during the war and had therefore no demand for substantial reparations. Lloyd George, the British Prime Minister, occupied a middle ground between Wilson and Clemenceau. Actually, he was in a difficult position. The population of Britain had demanded Germany to be severely punished and should be blamed for initiating the war. But Lloyd George was not personally willing to punish the Germans severely. He was afraid that if Germany was too weak, this would give France too much power in Europe. He did not want Europe to be dominated by France. Also, he did not want the balance of power to be upset in Europe. However, he wanted Germany to lose its navy and colonies so that it could not threaten the British Empire. Yet he also wanted Germany to be able to recover quickly so that it could start trading again with Britain. Before the war, Britain had been Germany's largest trading partner. Trade with Germany meant jobs in Britain. The war had cost the great powers huge sum of 45,000 million pounds, and Europe's economy had been switched from making goods to serving military needs. In doing so, they lost overseas markets to their non-European competitors like Japan and the USA. Being an elected representative of the country, Lloyd George could not ignore the public opinion, but at the same time he was deeply concerned that a harsh treaty might lead to a communist revolution like the one in Russia in 1970. The chief concern of Lloyd George was to make sure that the British Empire did not suffer as a result of the settlement. He did not agree with Wilson's demand of self-determination. Wilson hated imperialism and wanted German colonies to be looked after by the League of Nations until they became independent. Lloyd George wanted them divided up between the winning powers. Both Britain and France wanted a share of the former Turkish lands of the Middle East as well. Lloyd George aimed to attain the following in the peace settlement: re-establishing balance of power in Europe so that no single great power could dominate the continent and the power of France could be checked. He also wanted to return to trading patterns with Europe and the empire that had made Britain so wealthy before World War I. Number 3, preserving British naval supremacy so that it could guard the British Empire and its shipping routes. These aims were based on one important principle for Britain and Europe to recover economically, that is, Germany must be allowed to recover some of its pre-war economic strength. If the reparation bill was too high, it would damage Germany's economy that was needed for rebuilding and recovery. Due to these differences in opinion at the peace conference, the leaders had to make several compromises in order to establish peace which could not last long.